Hi, I'm Amy Koranek. I'm a brand ambassador for Sculpey, and I'm in the Sculpey Design Center today to talk about mixed media. Mixed media is one of my favorite ways to express creativity because it's so fun and it's so doodly and it's so free-flowing. So first, before we dive into a mixed media project, I want to talk to you about how you can select items to go into and support your polymer clay work. Whether, and by the word support I mean like it might be a vessel that you cover with clay, or it might be a frame, something that goes underneath the clay. And so I want to talk about how to select items like that and how to use them to your best ability to make them work for your specific project. Now let me back up and say that when I talk about mixed media, I'm talking about using polymer clay and at least one or two other, types of crafting that you might have. It could be paint, or it could be baubles and beads and findings that you have saved up. So it's a good way to use those things up. First, we're going to talk about glass, because glass is super easy to find. You can find it at garage sales and thrift stores and Goodwill, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. You might have all kinds of vases around where someone has sent you flowers. So glass is a really inexpensive thing to use as a support for polymer. And the shape of the glass is really important. Now, for example, this is a piece with straight up sides. So in this design, the polymer clay is wrapped around the vessel. It's not ever bonding permanently to the glass. It's just kind of stuck on there like a sleeve. So it would, even though it's not permanently bonded, it would be super difficult to get the clay design off of the glass because, it's completely surrounding the glass. So when I work with a straight side like this is a good place to cover the whole thing. The more clay you put on it, the better it will stick. This is a piece I did yesterday and it's still fresh. So one thing when you're covering glass, you want to make sure you're getting as many of the air bubbles out from between the clay and the glass as you can. And the unique thing about glass is that you can see through it. And so once I have the clay on the sides, I can just look down in there and I can see there's a bubble right here. It creates a dark spot between the glass and the clay, and I can just push those out with my fingertips, or I can even smooth them toward the open end. Here again, this is a large wrap. It's going to stay on there because it's really capturing the glass. Shapes like this are excellent for covering with glass because the curve of the glass is easily trapped by the clay. And so this is a beautiful candle wrap that one of my friends did. She's from Detroit, and anyway, she's got this beautiful translucent clay over it so that if you put a candle in there, it shines through. This would be a great little piece to cover with clay because it has the curved sides. Once you've got the clay on there, it's not going to come off. And so a piece like this, you could even just do a little band at the neck or at the bottom because the shape is going to really hold the clay on. So like I said, glass is a great way. We'll talk about metal later, but this would also be super cute if you just covered the metal lid with clay and just left the glass clear. So we'll talk about metal in a second. Now, the reason I brought this box in is because paper mache, cardboard, pieces like this, these actually can go right in the oven because paper and all paper products, they don't ignite till 411. So we're baking at 275 in our home oven. So while it might give off a little bit of an odor from maybe there's a little glue in here that holds it together, it's non-toxic and it covers easily with clay, and it's such a great way to recycle and upcycle and reuse things. You could easily paint the bottom just with some acrylic paint. You could just cover the top. You could use our translucent liquid Sculpey or our oven baked clay adhesive, either one of those, to create a nice surface that your polymer clay will stick to. And just think about that when you get nicely shaped in small boxes, what a great trinket or treasure box those would make if you repurpose them with some polymer. Next, we'll move on to metal. An interesting thing about metal, a lot of commercial metal pieces have a powder coating on them. And I've found that that powder coating, that polymer clay likes to stick to it. Also, you are creating, if you were to create a wrap around this entire box, then that's going to create a sleeve that will not easily come off the box. Also, this little ridge here at the bottom, that's going to help hold the clay on permanently. To decorate a box like this, I would first remove this plastic lid, because that's probably not going to survive the 275 Fahrenheit. So you would just focus on, covering this with clay. You might also make a mark in case part of that plastic lid overlaps, so that the lid, if you intend to use the lid, it would fit back on perfectly. Or if you're not going to use the lid, you could make, your own polymer lid to finish that off beautifully. These are little mint tins that I've used and repurposed for carrying my cutters around. You can see in here, this says the Altoids right here. And that raised Altoid surface creates a really nice bond for the clay to stick to. You can use different mediums. You could use super glue, because this is just a top surface. You could use a super glue or an E6000. But I find that for the most part, the clay really sticks on there quite well. And as long as I'm treating it nicely, I think I made this box about 4 years ago, and I've never had any problem with it coming apart. This type of little tin would be fun to just put like a little button of polymer, a little decoration right there, and to give that to someone with some goodies in it. So that's how you can cover with metal. Sometimes I like to select my tin. This is the original color of the tin, and so that lent itself really well to my polymer design. In this case, I actually painted the edge of the tin so that it would look nice with my liquid Sculpey design that I have there on the top. One more item that works really well in the oven is canvas, and this is an art canvas. These are fairly inexpensive. They have a nice tooth to the top of the canvas, and you could use translucent liquid Sculpey or oven bake clay adhesive to make a really nice grip. You could apply that as your adhesive over the top and then do your mixed media work over that. This whole thing can go right in the oven when you've got it created. Same thing for those canvases that wrap around the edge. Those look really nice for mixed media as well. Lastly, we are going to talk about wood, because the project we're doing today is based on a wooden frame. So wooden items are fairly easy to come by as well. And what you would want to do to prepare wood is first, if you have an idea that the wood, you don't know how it was processed in wherever it was made. Sometimes wood will release sap when it's heated. So one thing that you can do to get around that sap release is you can pre-bake your clay or your wood item right in the oven, in your preheated oven that you're using for polymer clay. So say 275, and that way it'll release any excess sap, and then you can sand that away so that it doesn't come up and create a bubble for your polymer work. Another thing I like to do is to sand the edges of wooden pieces that I've purchased, especially if they're inexpensive. This is just a liquid Sculpey design with lots of chunky glitter in the bottom of that. And lastly, before I do any projects on, let's say, wooden frames, I always paint the back of the frame and the edges, any exposed edges where I'm not using clay to cover that up. I'm going to paint that with a coordinating paint color. And if you'll do yourself a favor and do that first, that way any exposed areas that stick out beyond the clay are going to be neatly, finished. And you just want to pop out that inexpensive thing that comes, in the frame, set that aside, and then do your baking. So I had a little piece fall out here, and I'm going to show you how a lot of times we glue pieces in to mixed media as well. So I'll show you that when we get to that step in the process. So let's take a look at how to create a mixed media piece just like this one, and I'll show you all kinds of tips and tricks and techniques. Okay, before we get started, first I want to talk about how I created a surface between the wood frame and the clay that made a really nice surface for working on top of. So the paint is only on the edges and on the back. The paint does not wrap around to the top surface. So I've got this little piece of wood. It's actually the back of a wooden tray, but I just want you to see how I use translucent liquid Sculpey, or even the liquid oven baked clay adhesive. The oven baked clay adhesive is a little thicker than the translucent liquid Sculpey, and this one, oh no, this one is the oven baked clay adhesive now that I'm reading the label, but either one will work well. And so what you want to do is just squirt a generous amount on top of your wood, and then use a palette knife or whatever suits your working skills to just spread that stuff out. And you can spread it so that I always think that a good layer would be one that you can still see the color of the wood through. You don't want to get it on here too gooey because it can be slick to work on top of, especially if you need to get working right away. But if you don't need to get working right away, you can actually prep some pieces like this and let them sit overnight. And see how shiny this is. I'm hoping you can see the difference, that this is real shiny because I just applied it. But this frame that I started, I actually applied that oven baked clay adhesive yesterday, and I let the whole frame sit overnight before I even started, preparing this for the demo. And here you can see that while it's still not completely solid, it is more tacky and satiny in appearance. It's less shiny. And that's because some of that oven baked clay adhesive has absorbed into the grain of the wood, and it's making just a really nice texture for the clay to stick to. And it actually makes such a strong finished piece. Like this is just so strong. And that's because that oven baked clay adhesive also helps with the strength. So if you work on top of the oven baked clay adhesive while it's wet, it can give you a little bit of slipping around, and that might actually help you with certain types of designs, but I prefer to let it soak into the wood, and then I can just start working on top of it. So already I've done some things here to prepare my project that I'm not showing you from square one, because you probably know how to marble clay, and this is like 4 colors of marbled clay up here. I did use some of the the Sculpey 3 glitter colors, which gives you that really neat sheen that's happening up there with the glittery clay. This is white glitter Sculpey 3 right here that I'm applying. I also used a tan and some of the white glitter Sculpey 3 down here, and I just marbled those together and covered the background. That is giving me a nice background to play on top of and to explore creativity and just to doodle with. Another super fun thing about doing mixed media for me is that it kind of helps me pull out all the stops, and it helps me use tools in different ways that I probably wouldn't have used in a regular project. It's just very freestyle and really great for exploration. So in this case, I'm using my ball tool. This is the 12mm ball tool, and I'm just freestyling some frothy, foamy waves there. So I like to apply texture once the clay is already on the piece. I like to start applying texture at that point. Like these swirls you can see back here, I just used one of our texture sheets, this one that's got these bubbles, and I just, really pushed those in really hard and made some swirls in my ocean top there. The reason I like to apply texture later is because I feel like the pressure that you use to apply texture actually helps the clay stick to the background as well, because you're pushing in all these different areas, and that is just helping, the clay to stick down. So etch and pearl tools like this make some really neat looking little bubbles here in my ocean, and I just love the doodly possibilities that you can come up with when you're working in this freestyle way. Also, it helps me to think about maybe some unusual ways to texture. Like I've got an actual seashell here, and I can use that to texture, my sand. And that's something I didn't even think about in my original piece, but I love the way that texture of seashells actually lends itself, you know, to this type of project. Now that is what I'd like to say about, you know, using solid clays. And what I mean by solid clay is like Sculpey 3 or Primo or Soufflé. And then here's another way to use, to combine this with liquid Sculpey. So I used some of our liquid Sculpey, and this was the translucent turquoise, to create this ocean wave in our silicone mold. And once I have little elements like that created, liquid Sculpey elements stick really well to unbaked solid clays. So they're also easy to manipulate with scissors or with a sharp knife, and then I can just embed these pieces at will. They're pre-baked and now they're just ready to decorate with. And so I love the freedom that that gives to incorporate some molded items made from liquid Sculpey into your design. Okay, I have some other molded items that I actually made with the leftover from my sand, and I want to show you how these are pre-baked in our Sea Life mold. And I want to show you how, since these are pre-baked, I can really push on them really hard and not deform them. But I also want to show you how I used some more liquid Sculpey to help these items, you know, adhere to the background. So what I've got right here is a little bit of translucent liquid Sculpey that I added sand to. And here is an example. This has a lot of sand in it already, but it's not quite thick enough because I don't like the way it's really spreading there. So I'm just going to add more sand and stir it in. I like to save, if I find little tiny spoons, I like to save those in my work kit so that I always have something, you know, to play around with and help me move small bits of liquid around. So this is getting really pasty now from the sand that I added. And at this point, I think I'll also add some glitter. And this is kind of a chunky glitter. So that's another fun way to explore mixed media, is by adding glitters or adding mica powders. This is an example of mica powder. You can use those to tint your liquids, or you can use those as a highlight on top of the solid clay surface. And I've got this a little too thick now, so let me show you how you can adjust that. You can adjust it by either adding a little bit more of the translucent liquid Sculpey. You can also adjust it if you're super careful with our clay softener and thinner. This is a very liquidy product. You can see how thin it is, and you can just add that a drop at a time. And then I'll just stir this back up again. And it's kind of hit or miss, you know. I probably wouldn't have realized how thin and runny that one was, except it sat for a long time and it moved. By a long time, I mean like an hour. I put it on there about an hour ago and it moved more than I wanted it to. So you can always add more thinner, or you can always add more sand and mica powder and glitter, and that will thicken it back up. Okay, so the point of this is that I not only wanted to incorporate sand in my beachy, themey project here, but I want to use some of this sand to help lock in these extra elements. And what that does is it kind of frames my molded pieces and helps hold them in place. Down here I've embedded some seashells and some natural shell, and what I can do is just use this liquid to really bond those to the background. Because when this goes in the oven, that liquid Sculpey that we're putting on top with the sand in it is going to want to really bond with the Sculpey 3 underneath. And so you can actually trap things in this liquid, and I think that's really fun. Now seashells are cool because they have that shape that once you push them in to the clay will kind of come up around the edge of the pushed in piece, and then you don't really need to lock them in because their natural shape holds them in. But other pieces like shell and things, especially if you don't want to embed them in the background, you could just put them in like that and let the liquid Sculpey hold them into place. Okay, over here in my frame, I've got a little bottle, and inside the bottle I've got some sand, and I've got a little rolled up piece of newspaper. But wouldn't it be cool if, like, you went on a beach or an oceanfront trip, and let's say you saved a menu or a piece of a postcard or something that you could put in this tiny bottle with some sand, and that would be, you know, serve as a memory of your time that you spent there on the beach. And so the whole thing about doing mixed media in this way is that you can incorporate so many memories and so many items from a trip or from an outing that you took, and just create this whole keepsake. And in doing it like a frame, it's so cool because you can then add a picture at the end, you know, and help it to fully capture the memories that you made that day. Now I've embedded the little bottle, and it's a glass bottle so it can go in the oven, and I'm just going to use some of this sand mixture to really help build some walls around it to help hold it in. Now I'm baking it without this little cork. The little bottle came with a cork, and this cork can go in the oven, but I'm not baking it with the cork in place because there's air trapped inside the bottle, and air will actually expand as it's being heated. So I don't want to break the little bottle, so you need to leave the cork off, and I'll show you how to, you know, put it back in place later. All right, now here's a cool tip about this leftover sand. When I have mixed up specific colors of liquid Sculpey, I always want to find a way to dump those so that I can have my silicone cup back and ready to use. And so if you have a mold on hand, you could just fill the mold with the tinted liquid Sculpey or the textured liquid Sculpey that you've made, and just create for yourself a place to dump all this good stuff, and then go ahead and bake it and save that for future projects. And look how cool these came out. I wish I had made some of these before I started this frame, but these have the sand in them, and I just dumped them in the mold so that I would have, so that that liquid Sculpey wouldn't go to waste, and I love the way that looks. So having little molds on hand to offload your extra liquid Sculpey is a really good tip for working. All right, here's another molded piece that I pre-baked out of Sculpey 3, and this is a mermaid tail made from one of our molds, and I can just push that into place. And then I'm not really sure I like the way the end of that is covered, because I want it, or exposed, because I want it to have the feeling that it's coming up out of the water. So I'll just use some of my clay here to trap the end of the tail in place, and then I can just go back and add those same textures, and that will really help hold the tail. And it can even kind of come away from, you know, the background that way, because it's completely cemented in down here. Also, let me show you how to embed like glass baubles. Now glass obviously can go in the oven, so these can be embedded right here, but the shape of that glass isn't really going to lend itself to staying on the frame. Like once that comes out of the oven, it could pop right off. So I'll just take some scraps of my marbled sea color, and I'll just make a little design kind of wrapping around and slightly over the surface. And this would be such a cute thing if you had found some sea glass, you know, on the beach, and you wanted to incorporate that into your memory. These are little pearl beads, and I know that I can embed these in the clay, and they look like little bubbles, but I have actually pre-baked some of these pearl beads, and I know that they can go through the oven without melting. So that's another tip that you need to use. Like if you're ever in question about, will this survive the oven, or should I put it in the clay now, or should I make a space for it and then glue it in later? Just go ahead and pre-bake some pieces and see if they make it. You might be surprised at how many items, you know, actually do well at 275 in the oven. Okay, also I've got a few pieces of this raw shell, and I wanted to incorporate those into my top area too, because they kind of look like coral. And again, you either need to embed those you know, like right down at an angle so that the background clay holds them in. Or if you aren't able to do that, then you want to kind of go over the top here with some clay that will hold it in place, and then you can put some texturing of bubbles again over that over those stones or those shell pieces, just to make it, you know, look like it goes and like it's part of the water. Okay, let me take a breath, and I'm going to look at my frame here and see what else I need to add. Okay, let's talk a little bit about incorporating pieces that absolutely can't go in the oven. So I've got these sparkly rhinestones, which the colors of them are so pretty because they totally match my theme, but they will not make it through the oven. So what I can do is just carefully embed these where I might like them in my design, and then I'll just take a little tool and carefully take them back out. So what I've done is I've created a nice little well where I know that piece is going to go later, and I'll just offset these. I've just made a flat space so that they'll really go in well. And then after baking, I can go right back and I can use some adhesive to put those in place. And because I earlier in the program, I knocked out one of these shell pieces. I had this one in here in this finished frame, and you can see that I didn't embed it well with raw clay. It was just free to come right back out. So now that that happened, I'll show you how to glue it back in. So when working with oven bake polymer clay, you have some options for glues. You can use super glue gels, work really well. You can use silicone glue, that works really well. And you can also generally use white glue. And as long as it will hold, you know, the piece that you're gluing in, these little rhinestones here I glued in with white glue. Then it works well with polymer too. Any of these glues work well. So I'll just squirt a little bit of that in there, and then I'll be able to set my shell back in place like so, and then I'll just let the glue dry. So I love projects like this. It's a great way to showcase memories and to make keepsake treasures out of found items. I hope that you have as much fun with mixed media creating as I have had creating with you.